The first step is going to be to lubricate the balance jewels. So here you see the upper balance jewel. So I need to remove this, and it's got an Inca block shock absorber system. So I'm doing this under my microscope, so the frame rate on the video is not so great, and it's also very hard for me to see what I'm doing really well because one of the eyepieces is not available due to the fact that I'm also using a camera. So my depth perception is a little impaired here. But I'm using a tweezer and a piece of pegwood just to keep things from flying around to gently release that brass Inca block shock spring that holds the jewel in place. And once the shock spring is released, I can just kind of flip it up. It's got a nice little hinge to keep it stable. And I use my tweezers to remove the cap and hold jewel. The cap jewel is in the setting, and I remove it. The setting and the cap jewel is one unit. I then clean it really thoroughly. And after cleaning, you can see here I'm going to put a drop of Mobius 9010 on the flat surface of the cap jewel. I'm using the black light here just to observe it again. It doesn't show up well on the camera, using the fluorescent 9010 oil. And when I have it the way I want it, I will just cover it with the hole jewel. Turn it right side up and then position it back in the watch. And the jewel is resting on a piece of Rodigo to keep it, in place. Now I'm just sliding that out and sliding the movement underneath. I have to open that spring again. It just fell down on the hinge. And now I place the jewel as a unit back on top of the pivot. You'll see when I give it a little press here, it'll actually start to balance up. And then I just have to secure the spring. So here we just gently secure the spring back in place. And this is the lower balance jewel. I've already removed it, cleaned it, oiled it, and I'm just placing it back in. I didn't record that part. And once it's back in place, again, I just secure the Inca block spring just like I did on the upper jewel. There we go. The next thing we have to do is lubricate the escape wheel and pallet stone. And you'll recall in the prior video that I treated the escape wheel teeth with Mobius 8941 Epilame. And here I'm picking up a tiny dab of Mobius 9415 grease. And I'm placing it on the escape wheel tooth opposite one of the 4 arms on the escape wheel. And I should mention that prior to doing this, I treated the impulse faces of the pallet stones, just the impulse faces, with Epilame as well. Placed it back in the watch and let it run for about 10 or 15 minutes. And this causes the escape wheel, as they drag across the impulse faces of the pallet stones, to remove the Epilame and leave a nice little channel that the oil will adhere to. So I've just advanced, so I've done that already. Now I've advanced the escape wheel to the next tooth that is opposite an arm, and I'm oiling that tooth as well. Again, I'm using the microscope here instead of my regular camera, so it's not the greatest resolution, but I'm putting a tiny drop of oil right on the escape tooth. And this technique was recommended to me by a certified master watchmaker, CMW21, here in my town. And I do this for each of the 4 escape wheel teeth that are opposite the arms on the escape wheel, just as a point of reference, so it's nice and even. This is the third tooth. And I do this again to all 4 teeth, and then I'm going to run the escape wheel around a couple of times by rocking the pallets back and forth, pallet fork, and that will deposit the oil on the pallet stones, the impulse face of the pallet stones, as the escape wheel teeth move by. And I'll be able to check out and see how that looks on the pallet stone when we're complete. And I have one more tooth to go here. And you'll see at the end of this what I do. When I'm complete and I run the escape wheel down around a few times, I will look under heavy magnification at the exit stone. That's the stone on the left. I'll look at the impulse face of that stone, and I should see a nice streak of oil. And if it's not quite how I want it to be, if there's not enough oil on there, I'll just put another dab of oil on probably 2 opposite teeth on the escape wheel and run it around again. And I could do that, and it allows for very, very specific placement of the oil, which is really important in the escapement of the watch. And it's really hard, again, to do this without both eyepieces, so my depth perception is really impaired here. And it's very important that you don't accidentally touch an unintended surface with the oiler and deposit oil somewhere. And it's really tight quarters in here. So, and it's, this is a very small part of the watch, so it takes quite a bit of patience and a steady hand. I actually use my left hand to stabilize my right wrist, so that I can approach very, very slowly without, touching something inadvertently. And here I'm running that escape wheel around a number of times by advancing the pallets back and forth. And we're gonna, I also notice there's a little dab of oil on the top part of one of the teeth, kind of on the rim of the escape wheel. So I just use my Rodico to remove that. That's what I'm doing here, just dabbing that away so I don't have it anywhere I don't want it to be. And now we're going to take a look at that impulse face of the pallets, of the exit pallet stone. We'll magnify it up really nice and big, and you should be able to see the streak of oil left right across the center of the impulse surface, impulse face. So let's take a look. And here it is, and you can see the arrow is pointing to that nice stripe right across the center of that impulse face, exactly where I want it, and I'm pretty happy with that. So that is the way that you lubricate the balance wheel pivots and the escape wheel. And also I should mention, you do not lubricate the pivots of the pallet fork. That's the one place, the one set of jeweled bearings that you do not lubricate. And there you go. And the next step is to assemble the chronograph bridge assembly. But before we do that, I'm going to use some HP 1300 to lubricate this joint here with this second operating lever. This part is permanently affixed to the barrel bridge. Also going to use some HP 1300 to lubricate the post that the main operating lever will attach to. And finally, some 1300 on the lower jewel for the ratchet wheel driving wheel, which is part of the automatic winding mechanism. It's the wheel that will drive the ratchet wheel when the automatic winder operates. And this is Mobius 9504 grease that I'm putting on the crown wheel core. That is the post that the cam will rotate on. This is the cam spring, and I'm just putting it on a piece of pithwood here so that I can lubricate the beak at the end of that spring where it will interact with the cam itself. And again, I'm using Mobius 9504 here. And then we'll put the cam spring into the watch. just fits over these two posts, and then you kind of give it a little twist, rotate it a little bit clockwise, and it locks into place. Next, before we put the cam in place, I will use the 9504 grease to lubricate the edges of the surfaces on the cam that will interact with the various other levers and controls. I do this in two parts. I flip it over now. You can see where that 9504 grease is, and now I put a little bit in this slot, in this cutout, and that is where the detente or the detente will fit in. I put the cam back onto the crown wheel core, and I leave that slot right where I know that the detente will come into place. And I just put a little bit of pressure on the cam spring, and the cam falls right into place, and then I can secure it with a screw. Just clean up some oil marks, some lubrication marks with my Rodico. This is the detente, and I'm going to put a little lubrication on the end of this as well. It should also be noted that I treated the detente with epilame before I started this process as well. So the epilame is that Fixodrop 8941. Or the new part number for that is 8981 Mobius. Now I'll be able to put the detente right into the watch. And the purpose of the detente is that it kind of transfers the action of the cam to the dial side of the watch. There's actually a bit of an eccentric on the end of that post of the detente. So when it rotates, due to the cam rotating, it transfers that action to the dial side of the watch. And this is that ratchet wheel, driving wheel. And you'll remember we already lubricated with 1300, the lower jewel. This is the friction spring. This part does not get washed because it is plastic. It has a plastic component to it. So I just clean it off with some Rodico. It sits right in like that. Another surface on the cam that will interact with the lock, and here is the lock. The lock is used to arrest the motion of the chronograph seconds wheel when the chronograph mechanism is stopped. And this is the chronograph bridge. Goes on really very easily, just to make sure that the ratchet wheel driving wheel pivot is in place, and also that that second operating lever is not interfering with the fit. And we secure it with 2 screws. And I'm putting a little bit of HP 1300 on the upper jewel of the ratchet wheel driving wheel. This is the operating lever spring. I'm putting a little bit of 9504 on the part of the spring that will contact that second operating lever, the one that is permanently fixed to the barrel bridge. And we just slot it in here. Perfect. And now we'll put a little 9504 on the other part of that spring that interacts with the main operating lever that we will install. Just checking the action on the second operating lever. This is the main operating lever. And again, we'll use some 9504. There's a couple places that we need to lubricate this part. On each of these end points, I will put a little 9504. And also right here where that end piece rotates, again, this is permanently assembled. Clean up a little bit, and now I can install the operating lever. And it fits right in there. Gets secured with the operating lever screw, which is the same screw type as is used to fix the cam in place. Check the action. And there's another place on this operating lever we have to lubricate. There's a spring that's built into this operating lever, and here I'm pulling that spring back, and I'm lubricating the surface that the spring interacts with some 9504. Getting it all along that surface. Do a little cleanup with my Rodico. that is the way that we assemble the chronograph bridge. Make sure we get all the marks off the movement. So next up is building of the automatic device bridge. So here you see the reversing wheel. What we do now is we're going to treat the reversing wheel with Lubetta V105. And this is a special lubrication specifically for these reversing wheels. And I just put it in a little jar, give it a gentle shake to get the lubrication all over this part. And then once that's done, we just remove it and kind of use the blower to dry it off. When you purchase these reversing wheels new, they come pre-treated with the Lubetta. And just drying it off with a couple pumps of the air blower. And this part has some very small, you can't disassemble this part, but it basically consists of 2 gears with some tiny pawl springs and clicks inside of it that cause the top, or the well, now it's upside down, but it causes one of the gears to rotate freely in one direction and will carry both gears if rotated in the other direction. It's kind of similar to a bicycle freewheel. And you see this when you have one reversing gear in the watch. It means that the watch will only the automatic winding mechanism will only work in one direction, say counterclockwise or clockwise. If you have 2 of these, they can be set up in an arrangement where the watch will wind in either direction. The 7750 only winds in one direction. Okay, a little lubrication here with the Mobius 9504, and that post is where the hammer will be installed at a later point. And we use some 9010 on this jewel, which is where that reversing wheel will be installed. This is the chronograph seconds hand wheel. And this just simply goes right into the center here. And I move the lock out of the way. Remember, the lock will engage the side of that, the rim of that seconds wheel to stop it, to arrest its movement. And here I'm showing you how the chronograph mechanism, you'll notice that the lock right here moved away from the wheel. In this position, this is the running position, where the chronograph will, when the rest of the mechanism is installed, it will run the chronograph mechanism. And if I push that again, it actually engages the lock. Again, you can't see it here fully because the wheel is not supported by the upper jewel, but the lock moved closer and will actually arrest the movement of that wheel. And this is the start-stop of the chronograph. The second lever here actually will reset the mechanism, and I'm just going to push directly on the cam over here, which is exactly what this lever will do when pushed in. But push it in, and you'll notice that the lock moves away from the wheel. And the reason for that is that the hammer, which hasn't been installed yet, will reset, will flip the the minute counter and the seconds wheel back to 0, so they have to be able to rotate freely. This is the minute counter, and it goes right in right here like this, and we need to make sure that the minute counter jumper is appropriately engaged in the teeth of the minute counter. And the minute counter engages with that gold jeweled wheel that is underneath the lock. This is the oscillating pinion, and during the disassembly video I showed you the correct orientation for this pinion, and it slides right in here. There's a jewel in the bottom of this, which we will lubricate at the end of this procedure. And I actually went to my microscope to put this in the right place, but I'm back now, and this is the clutch. The clutch has a tiny bearing on top for the top pivot of that oscillating pinion. And I also did put a little bit of HP 1300 on the where that clutch rotates. So clutch is installed now, and I'll now use some 9504 grease right where the cam interacts with the clutch. And the clutch is used to move that oscillating pinion in and out of engagement with the center seconds wheel. The bottom part of that oscillating pinion is always in motion. It's connected to the fourth wheel, or the seconds wheel. And when that clutch is engaged, it moves it in and out to rotate the center seconds wheel. This is the hammers, and the hammers are used to reset the minute counter and the chronograph seconds wheel. And I'm just going to use a little bit of 9504 right on the edges of the hammer where they will interact with the center seconds wheel and the minute counter. The parts that they interact with are called the hearts. They're specially shaped so that no matter what orientation, no matter what rotation the center seconds and the minute counter are in, the heart will, when it is snapped against that, when the hammer is snapped against the heart, it will spin it very quickly back to the reset 0 position. That's how that works. Sorry about the camera angle here. But I'm just putting a little 9504 right on the edge. And I'm also going to put a little bit of 9504 on the cam where it will make contact with the hammer. And then we'll install the hammer. And the hammer will be put under a very large amount of tension by the hammer spring that we're going to install towards the end of this procedure. Just cleaning up the center seconds wheel there, a little bit of oil, smudge. And that's how the hammer goes. And I'll show you here, when it is pushed in this direction, you can see it's starting to rotate that center seconds wheel already. That would be the action that is used to actually reset both the center seconds wheel and that minute wheel. This is the reduction gear, and it simply is dropped right into this recess, and it engages the ratchet wheel driving wheel. And then we'll move on to the reversing gear that we treated with the Lubetta earlier. And this just sits in place and connects to the reduction gear. There's a tiny little pawl spring right here, a click spring that we have to make sure is not underneath that reversing gear. It actually interacts with the teeth, the lower teeth of that reversing wheel. And that's what I'm doing here. I don't want it to be underneath, and then when I put the bridge on, it will, distort that spring. And this post on the bottom of this bridge right here, you can see it. We actually put a reasonably good amount of HP 1300 on this post, and this post is what's going to slip into the center of the reduction gear, which you recall we just kind of dropped into place in the previous step. Just putting that bridge in place. And before we screw it down, I make sure that that little tiny spring is not is in the right place with that reversing gear. I make sure everything is in here nice and snug. Make sure the minute recording wheel jumper is in the right orientation. Got to be very careful here. You can really damage the parts of the watch if things are not properly seated. And this bridge has 3 jewels in it. One jewel is where that minute recording wheel is. The other jewel is for the reversing wheel. And there is a jewel right in the center, which is where the center seconds wheel, the chronograph seconds wheel, the upper pivot is in that jewel as well. Just checking the action, making sure that everything is perfect here. Again, now you'll be able to see how this hammer works. Well, I'm checking the reversing wheel, making sure that it is operating appropriately. Here's the hammers. When I push it, you'll notice it just spun that minute recording wheel and the center seconds wheel, which you can't see. Here you go, I'll do it again. Boom. That's how it resets back to 0. And again, the spring is not installed yet. Well, we'll do that next, but that spring provides an incredible amount of force to that hammer when it is activated. So I'm putting a little bit of lubrication on the hammer where the hammer spring will contact it. And this is 9504. Here's the hammer spring. You just kind of drop it right in place like that, and there's, again, that provides quite a bit of force. And this is the clutch spring right at the top of the screen here. The clutch spring provides the right amount of force on that clutch, and it is held in place. It looks like a screw there, right where my pegwood is, but that's actually an eccentric. It's an eccentric screw that is used to adjust the depthing of the oscillating pinion into the center seconds wheel. We'll get to that step towards the end of the assembly, where we check the alignment of all these parts, the depthing of several of these parts. And all that's left now is just making sure the spring is seated appropriately. But then all that's left is to lubricate with some 9010 the top pivot for the reversing wheel and the center seconds wheel. Got that clutch spring in place. Do a little test here. You see, actually, if you look carefully now, that center seconds wheel is rotating because the oscillating pinion is engaged with it now. So what's happened when I push that button, the hammers moved far away from the minute recording wheel and the center seconds wheel. That frees it up because the lock has not been engaged with the center seconds wheel, and the clutch was engaged to bring the oscillating pinion into contact with the center seconds wheel. Giving a little whine to the watch here, and so it runs. It's still running. You look carefully. That center seconds wheel is running. Doing my lubrication now. This is 9010. Going to get that center seconds wheel top pivot. Now I turn the movement over, and I'm just going to lubricate the bottom pivot of the oscillating pinion. just a very, very small quantity of 9010 here. And this is the bottom of the detente that you recall. And I just want to show you when you do the start-stop, you'll notice that part that I just touched, how it spins around. And that's going to be used, again, that transfers the action of that detente from the back side of the watch to the dial side, and it will be used in a later step to engage with the hour counting mechanism. So just a little, again, a little review. I push that, the hammer comes back, the clutch is engaged. Again, the clutch is moved by the cam as well, and the center seconds start to rotate. If I push it again, as I push this in and out, you may notice the lock is now going in and out to arrest the movement of right here. The lock is arresting the movement of the center seconds wheel. That's how you start and stop the chronograph. When I reset it with this lever, two things happen. The lock moves away and the hammers drop into place and spin very quickly. That's how you reset the hands to 0. But the lock had to move away as well so that you didn't try to rotate with the lock engaged. Next up is the motion work. I'm just going to show you how this hour wheel, the hour recorder mechanism works first. So you'll notice here, this is the hour recording wheel, and my tweezers are pointing to the bottom of the mainspring barrel. There's a gear there, and the hour recording wheel has a gear on it that connects right to that. And there's also the spring, which kind of operates like a clutch. So left to its own devices, if this hour recording wheel is in place, it will rotate along with the mainspring barrel and carry the hour recording hand with it. But we can also arrest the movement of that recording wheel, and that spring will allow the mainspring barrel to continue to turn. This is the hour reset operating lever. And this is the hour hammer. And the hour hammer connects right here, which is the reverse side of the detente that we talked about on the other side, which is connected to the cam. And you can see when I press the chronograph button, the hour hammer moves towards the hour recording wheel, and it will reset it like that. It will interact with the heart on the hour recording wheel and cause it to reset to 0. This is the hour hammer spring, and this spring basically squeezes together the hour reset operating lever and the hour hammer. I'm not going to put it in place now. I just wanted to show you. It will basically keep the hour hammer trying to move it away from the wheel. And I just put the chronograph into operating mode. So the chronograph is ticking now. And if you press the reset button here, it doesn't move the hammers, which is exactly what you want. This is the hour lock. This is a plastic part, so again, it's not washed. And it moves in the opposite direction of the hammer. So when the hammer comes away, the lock goes and stops the wheel from moving, the hour recording wheel from moving. And this is if we put the chronograph in the stop position. When we're doing an actual reset and the hammers come in like that, it will move the lock away so that the wheel can spin freely back to 0. And it's set up so that when the chronograph is running, the lock is away from the wheel as well. It's all about the movement of this part right here, the detente. So I'm going to lubricate that with a little HP 1300. This is where that operating lever will rest, so 1300 there as well. This is post for the intermediate date setting wheel. This is the post for the minute wheel. This is the post for the date driving wheel. And the post for the day driving wheel. may have those backwards. Doesn't matter. They're both the same. One drives the day, one drives the date. Put a little 1300 on the post where the free cannon pinion will rest. And again, here's the hour counting wheel. I'm going to lubricate it now with a little 1300. Right, we have to get it under that spring. I'm showing you here, it's hard to see in this video, but that I'm holding the brass part and turning the gear itself. That spring allows it to slip so that when the hour recorder is in the stop position, it doesn't cause the mainspring barrel to stop moving and stop the whole train of wheels. So I'm putting a little 1300 on each of these areas underneath that spring, and then I'll give it a little rotation to spread the lubrication. There we go. Spread it around just like that. That should be good to go. This is the driving pinion. And the driving pinion is lubricated in two places. Again, this has a clutch in it as well. The purpose of the driving pinion, this is kind of replaces the regular cannon pinion. This is what drives the motion work. And I'm showing here, it's hard to see, but I'm holding the center of this still with a piece of pegwood, and I'm able to rotate the gear around. We lubricate this with 9504. And I put a bit 9504 under each of these, in each area by the spring. And I'll give it a little rotation again to spread the lubrication. And this spring allows you to set the time without, again, freezing up the train of wheels. So I'm just going to give that spring a little turn. Just a little bit here. We'll also do this once the driving pinion is in place. Checking it with the black light. And ETA states that you're not really supposed to wash this part. The reason for that is it's really hard to get the 9504 lubrication on this side, underneath, between the two components that form this part. The rotating piece that rotates freely against the spring and the part that'll be fixed to the post. So I'm just putting a liberal amount of 9504 on here, and we'll show you how I clean this up a little bit later. Okay, and this gets pressed right here onto this post. And I use my Horatech hand presser, the one that does not have a hole in it. I'll show you a picture of that in a second. It's right here. And I just use this to press straight down on top of the driving pinion until it's flush with the top of that post. Now I want to exercise this, so I'm going to put in place the cannon pinion and minute wheel. Here's the cannon pinion and the minute wheel. And now I can turn the hand setting mechanism and it will rotate that driving pinion, as you can see here, and that's going to spread the lubrication. And I'm just going to take the tip of my fine oiler and I'm going to hold it right where I want to get that lubrication underneath, in between the two parts of that driving pinion. I don't know if this really works or not. Again, ETA's recommendation is just to replace this part if it's dirty. I did wash it, so I'm attempting to get it lubricated as best as I can. So here's my little oiler, and you want to be careful not to break this oiler. This is one of these very expensive oilers. But I just hold it in that crease there and run the motion work around. Now I'll clean up the excess 9504 with my Rodico after I remove the minute wheel here. So just clean it up. And we can put the minute wheel back. Now let's get on with the assembly. First part, well, actually put a little bit of 1301 on the cannon pinion. This is where the hour wheel will rest. This is the intermediate day and date wheel. Oops. That was the hour wheel. Not ready for that yet. Well, there you go. That is the hour wheel. That is the hour wheel, and now we have the day and date driving wheels. And this one, which I believe is the day driving wheel, I line it such that the beak is in line with this mark on the plate. And in the disassembly video, I incorrectly explained the proper orientation of these two wheels. Here I will show you the correct orientation. The second wheel has its beak pointing at the post, the center of that intermediate day driving wheel. I had incorrectly stated that it should point to the cannon pinion. That is not correct. So here's the correct orientation. There you go. And it points right there. Again, this makes sure that the day and the date flip over at midnight together. Or pretty close together. Here's our hour wheel, our recording wheel. And the operating lever, the hour reset operating lever. Going to put a little bit of 9504 right where that operating lever contacts the pusher. Sorry, my fingers are blocking the view here. Now we're going to lubricate the hammer. This is the hour hammer. I have it resting on its side. And I just paint a little strip of 9504 along the edge of that hour hammer. And I can now place that in. I'm just going to remove that hour counting wheel, make it easier to place the hammer in place. And there's the hammer in place. I'm going to lubricate with 9504 right at the contact point where the hammer and that operating lever come into contact with each other. Got a little too much there, so I'll clean it up with the Rodico. And before we put that hour counting wheel back, put a little bit of 1300 right in the hole where it will rotate. Next up will be the lock, the hour lock. And this plastic part, no lubrication on this part whatsoever. Okay, and this is the hour hammer spring. Already put it in place here. And unfortunately I take it out of the view of the camera here, so sorry about that, but there you can see the proper positioning of that now, of that spring. Everything looks like it's in place now. Now we're getting ready to put the calendar platform in place, and the calendar platform holds all these parts in place, and the calendar mechanism will then be placed on that platform in the next step. And I'm looking at my camera screen here, so I actually don't have that lined up properly. And once I realize it, there we go, give it a little twist, and there we go. Right in place. And make sure that the hour recording wheel is properly seated. Make sure the calendar platform goes down nice and securely in all locations. Now we can secure it back with the 3 screws. Whenever I'm putting these plates in place, I always use a piece of pegwood just to hold the plate in position, just so that when I'm bringing my screwdriver into position, it doesn't kind of knock anything out of place, and then you screw the plate down and break a pivot or something like that. And now we're going to do a quick demonstration, make sure the time setting works. Now I have the chronograph testing the run and stop of the chronograph. And here's a test of the hammer. And you can notice that hammer at the top there kind of going in and resetting the hour recording wheel. And that's how we put together the motion work. And some components of the calendar mechanism as well. The day and date, driving wheels, etc. As well as the chronograph. And here I'm just moving the hour recording wheel around a little bit, making sure that the chronograph is in the run position. And now I stop it, and making sure the lock is holding that securely, and then I can reset it with the hammers. And there you go.